Welcome to this evening's April meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones on silent or their electronic devices if they have one near them. And those present in the room should face forward, speak directly into their microphones and not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. Please, with remote participants, mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth and prevent loss of connection. Members of the council who join us remotely should leave cameras on. Officers leave cameras on only for the agenda item they're speaking to. After each item has been presented, I would invite members present in the room to ask questions first. Those members who join us remotely will then be invited to speak, and they should indicate their wish to do so by raising your hand facility. Only those members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee present in the room will be making the decisions, and I will confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching the webcast. Please be aware there can be a slight time delay of around 5 seconds whilst a remote participant appears on screen. So with that, agenda item 1, do I have your approval to resolve the minutes of the last meeting, held on whatever date that was? 14th of March as a correct record. Agreed. We agree. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. Apologies and substitutions. I don't believe there are any. I think we're all here. Yep. Good. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosure of interest. I probably wouldn't think there would be anything to disclose an interest on, actually. All right, Councillor Cortell.
Yes, I have an interest in a couple of items. First of all, I'm a member of Sussex Wildlife, which I mentioned in one of the reports. And secondly, a member of Bexhill Environment Group.
Okay. Polly, I assume you're very similar?
Yes, I didn't realise that was relevant.
Councillor Barnes?
Yes, I think Sussex Wildlife Trust, I'm a member. The other thing probably, since we do mention heat pumps for housing, is of course I'm a director of Alliance Housing, except it's not called Alliance these days. I think we're going to change our name on Thursday. So I better say the Rother Housing Company, I think.
Okay, and there's me thinking there was no declarations of interest to make, but anyway. Councillor Drayson.
Same as Councillor Barnes.
Okay, got those, Julie? Great, thank you. Right, item 5, review of the Constitution, recommendations of the Constitution Review Group. I think what I'll do, I'll start this off by saying this group was set up in January 21. It's made up of councillors John Barnes, Terry Byrne, Brian Drayson, Eleanor Kirby-Green, Andrew Mear, Martin Mooney, Sue Prochak and Jonathan Vinehall, and the chairman was Councillor Drayson. There was also officer support from Lisa. No. Who else was there? Oh, and Julie. I understand it met about 10 times, and probably in excess of 20 hours has been spent on this. So I don't really want to reinvent the wheel, if you like. And what I would say is thank you to the panel. That's why we sort of set up a panel, is to basically do the work for us, and then we can just make sure it's all good, which I'm sure it is. So what I'll do, if you want, I'll go straight over to... I was going to go to Councillor Drayson as the chairman, but he's saying go to Lisa. So Lisa, I'll start with Lisa, which you probably really appreciate.
Thank you, Chairman, and evening, everybody. Just to say, yes, members and officers have undertaken a very thorough review by comparing the Council's constitution against other models, as well as neighbouring authorities and other good practice. The scope of the work undertaken by the steering group is shown out at Appendix 1, Parts 3, responsibility for functions, and 8, delegations to officers, are still to be completed, and these will follow later this year. Attached to Appendix 2 is a full list of all the main proposals which are either a deviation to current practice and represent a change to the way the Council operates, or new provisions which are not within the Council's existing constitution. Those that are considered worthy of special note have been highlighted in the appendix. Comparing different models to our own identified several easy, quick improvements that could be made throughout the document, ranging from layout changes, minor clarifications, gender-neutral terminology, the use of chair and vice chair, and improved use of plain English. A number of these amendments have been made throughout. Whilst looking at the various parts of the Constitution that relate to the scrutiny function, the steering group considered the role of scrutiny and whether it adds value to the work of the Council and is as effective as it could be and clearly understood by all members. As a result, there is a proposal from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny to undertake a scrutiny improvement review with full details attached to Appendix 3. The cost of that review would be for $4,850, which can be funded from our member training budget if you wish to pursue that. I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Councillor Drayson, do you want to sort of put your two benefit?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I won't be long, but I would like to thank all the members of the steering group for their contributions, and actually mention Councillor Cortell, who I think attended everyone and contributed, so thank you. As I said in an email earlier this week, we've spent the time doing the work so that full council don't have to. On some occasions, we spent much longer than we should have done over 1 or 2 words, but we got there in the end, and the thought of 38 people now rehashing the odd word would be quite scary. But it is there. We have compared mainly to South Cambridgeshire, which was a good one, but we've rejected some of those parts that didn't fit to us. What I would say is one of the most important things we've put in here is a glossary of terms, which is very much a living thing. So every time somebody says, what does that mean? Please let Lisa know and we can put it in there. Because jargon is our sort of worst enemy. So we've got that glossary of terms in, which is a living document. And apart from that, the suggestions or recommendations are before you.
Thank you. I did have a couple of emails over the weekend. Councillor Errington, you had a couple of questions that you were going to ask Lisa. Just wondered if they've been answered successfully.
Yes, sorry, I can't remember. One was just terminology. Another one was the use of chairs instead of chairmen. And the other one was to do with, help me out here, Lisa, it was the chorusy in terms of hybrid meetings.
Yes, Councillor, you asked whether members attending remotely counted for the quorum of a meeting. No, it doesn't. It's quite clear in our council procedurals that you have to be present in the room to be part of the quorum. So, yeah, only members present in the room would count in terms of being quorum or not.
Councillor Coleman, you had a small raft of questions. I'm assuming they've been answered successfully, and if you wanted to sort of elaborate on them.
Yeah, Chair, most of my, in fact all of my questions were answered very ably. I probably don't need to go through them. The only one that still is perhaps a point to raise, because the answer was that this is for members to decide, and there's sort of no answer to it, was just a query in terms of, I don't want to go into particular articles, but Article 2.8 talks about a major opposition group report, and I just queried whether it was worth including also a minor opposition groups reporting, because obviously there could be a scenario in the future, let's say the Monster Raving Loony Party takes over this council, that there's 2 or 3 opposition groups that have quite different views on the way the council should go forward, and it would be sort of the more reports from opposition groups, the better in terms of that sort of function of the opposition, I guess. So that was my only other point. Apart from that, I think it's a really good report. Especially, I'm happy to see the gender-neutral terminology. I think it's about time, and yeah, no, nothing more to say.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Just to comment on Councillor Coleman's point, at the moment there is only one formal opposition group. The Constitution has to be reviewed at the start of every new council. That is one of the provisions in the council. So I would suggest at the moment we don't try to recommend a change, because in a sense, if there are more than one option group, that will come up at the start of the new council, and that's the appropriate moment to make an amendment.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Would you agree with that, Councillor Coleman?
Yes, I think that makes sense. It was only just it might save the next iteration of the council some work in having to review the whole constitution because of one point as well, I guess.
Yeah, but I suppose if it's in the constitution that at the beginning of each council, after an election, you're going to know what the makeup is and the grouping and whatever. Then I suppose it can be adjusted to suit, can't it? I think that's probably the idea, to keep it give it some freedom. Would you agree with that, Lisa? To a degree?
Yeah, seems sensible.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I was looking at the item Overview and Scrutiny Review on item 17, which I found a bit strange. It says that the committee considered the role of scrutiny and whether it added value to the work of the council is as effective as it could be and still clearly understood by members. Well, I thought everybody would understand the role of scrutiny, which is basically to challenge the administration and the cabinet what way they're going, and whether we feel things should be done a different way or need to be brought back to scrutiny. And people who've got their own issues, as I've done in the past, can bring issues to scrutiny to be considered by the committee. So I find it a bit strange that to say, is it an effective way of working on the council? Have a scrutiny. I mean, I thought the answer was obvious. I'm just being devil's advocate.
Councillor Drazen, you put your hand up to answer that one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it says, it's not saying it's not effective, it's saying it's as effective as it could be. We had the odd discussion over, did we think scrutiny had teeth? And we decided it did have teeth. It's not everyone knows it has teeth and can do more. So it's basically making sure members, just not on this committee, but outside this committee, really do understand scrutiny.
Any more? Councillor Cortown.
Thank you, Chair. One point's arisen relatively recently since the Constitutional Committee has met, which is brought up by the independent person for audit at the Audit and Standards Committee. And that is that there's no opportunity to raise matters arising from the minutes. Now, I understand from an officer that it requires 5 working days' notice of business, 5 of any business to be discussed at formal meetings, and therefore it's impractical to have matters arising within a formal meeting. My question is, if a member gives 5 working days' notice in writing and asks for an update of something that arose at the last meeting, could that be presented briefly at the next meeting in 2 or 3 sentences without the need for a 10-page report, or does that require a constitutional amendment?
I think Malcolm can have a go at that one.
The short answer is I don't know, because it depends what the matter that is arising from it. That in some cases it may be able to be answered in a straight yes or no, and other times it may not be possible to answer in a straight yes or no. The reason that we keep it as the published agenda is A, to be open and transparent about what's going to be discussed, and so that members are informed on that subject. And secondly, I think there could be a danger that there could just be an opportunity to discuss anything and everything at a meeting, and therefore it would be very difficult for the chair to manage the meeting in that way. hence why there are no matters arising. What you can do, of course, is if there are any factual inaccuracies in the minutes, then they can be raised and they can be agreed if there's an amendment at that stage. I think it's been a practice that has served us well in terms of dealing with it, and particularly in audit and standards that runs with a very set and regular cyclical agenda. I think that it's useful for members to have that approach. So if Councillor Cortell is saying, if he gives 5 days notice, can I guarantee you will get an answer? It's possibly is the best I can do for you.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I'm sort of some sort of what I've read through, which has been highlighted in the yellow. I thought, well, we do that anyway, and I sort of mentioned this at my briefing last week, and Lisa said, well, yeah, I know, but we're just sort of making it formal. And there's bits like the chairman of council can't move because he's ex officio, he can't move or vote on an item. But now it's sort of in yellow and black, if you like, to prove that. But I always thought it was just as it was anyway. So a lot of it is a sort of a tidying up exercise as well. Can I, chairman of a full council? I know in this year we've done 2 years because we had the COVID basically and almost a shutdown. Says there's a new sort of idea that we can have chairman or vice chairman for 2 years, but if the chairman only wanted to do 1 year, I suppose that's his prerogative to just do 1 year. So it's a maximum of 2 years. Sorry.
Just to confirm, the chairman of council will still be elected every year. What that means is the same councillor could be elected on 2 years on the trot, like we've had. So you wouldn't be elected in for a 2-year term, but you could serve 2 1-year terms back to back.
Okay, that's all right then. Good. Right, well, if there's no one else wishing to speak, what I'll better do is ask for someone who would like to move the recommendations. And there's...
Happy to move,
You're
Chair.
happy to move, and Councillor Barnes, you was on it, so you're happy to second?
That's okay.
I would think so. All those in favour, please show. That's carried. Thank you very much. Anyone against? No. Right. That's good. That's carried. Thank you very much. Programme on the environment strategy, page 109. So a bit of flicking. Over to you, Ben. Oh. Item 6. What we got here? Update members on the progress of implementation of the Council's Environment Strategy. Resolve of progress made against Environment Strategy 2020 be noted. You'll note that this is on. We sort of put it on the work programme that we have an update every 6 months to make sure it sort of didn't disappear somewhere. Councillor Field, the chairman of the group, has come along as well this evening. Ben, do you want to kick off?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I mean, as you said, Chairman, this is the 6 monthly update report, so it's just a brief report of activity over the last 6 months to members of this committee. I suppose there's a number of key elements that I'd like to draw out. In terms of staffing resources, as identified in paragraph 3, we've now appointed a projects officer for the environment. This officer will be primarily concerned with delivering projects as outlined in the appendix, primarily against trying to help the organisation reduce its own carbon footprint, but also looking outwardly and seeing about projects that can be delivered elsewhere. In the paper it does say they'll start in June. I was reassuringly informed today actually they're starting next week, which is even better. So that work will commence even earlier. We are looking to employ a second post as well, someone who takes a more strategic view, who will be undertaking much more in terms of the way of outward communication, partnership working, and sort of furthering the strategic approach that we have in terms of the wider environment strategy. A couple of points in there about the projects. These updates were provided by Deborah Keneally, who's the Head of Service for Neighbourhood Services, who's overseeing a lot of this work. Obviously, a number of members will have undertaken the carbon literacy training over these months. And then there is the work of there's the community infrastructure levy. Obviously that's already been through this committee, but just to remind that that's now enabled a particular proportion of the community infrastructure levy to be dedicated towards environmental projects that meet the basic SIL criteria. And then there's the work of the Climate Change Steering Group. I'm really pleased to sort of say that actually having to take a lot of personal responsibility for this, having pulled my finger out a little bit, we've now had about, I think, 4 meetings since the last update, 4 meetings of the Climate Change Steering Group since the last update, and they're now scheduled to take place monthly. We've introduced a number of the smaller sort of projects that were identified, including green tips and the staff digital suggestion box, and we've put forward 4 projects into consideration for SIL funding, which will be then taken forward by the Strategic SIL Allocations Panel for consideration at their next meeting. In terms of next steps, so we'll be looking to work with the 2 new officers to continue the work with the steering group and to aim to meet our net carbon zero targets. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'm just reading there the hydro-treated vegetable oil and the waste collection lorries. I can remember back in about 2006, I tried running one of my van on the chip fat, as it was called then, and it literally did smell like chip fat. And after about 3 months, it clogged up my filters, so I had to go back to normal diesel. So I would assume in the preceding 17 years, it might have got a bit better. It probably worked better with a big lorry. It can't smell any worse than a refuse truck. Anyway, we digress. Councillor Maynard.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I'll just note firstly that there's mention there of East Sussex County Council on big page 110, number 8, in terms of trees for cities and working with East Sussex County Council, so it's probably appropriate at this stage for me to declare a personal interest as an executive member of East Sussex County Council. But I think tree planting...
Excuse me, could I just interrupt and say ditto?
I mean, it's dear to all of us, but historically, I have to say, there's a tendency with tree planting just to think we've got to carpet this area with saplings with no actual regard for how fast they grow, whether it's indigenous or not, whether it's low maintenance or not, whether indeed actually by planting them too close together in haste to get the job done, that you actually have a canopy that completely cancels out everything else that's underneath the said tree canopy. So it's just a plea to make sure that the evidence base is there before we go before we start planting trees, because there is plenty of evidence throughout East Sussex where a lot of tree planting has been done and it's not the right type of tree. They're not low maintenance, and in fact, before long you're in there not coppicing it, but actually taking down whatever you've taken the time to put in the first place. So I think there's a bit of education there as well. Also, my plea would be, as part of that, that where we've seen significant ash dieback, that perhaps we look at those areas very carefully and to try and get some, obviously, replacement for those trees. And you'll see plenty of those, for example, on the highway as you drive from Bexhill to Hastings. The problem of ash dieback is actually far greater than I think most of us would ever originally envisage, and it's certainly at a similar level, I think, anecdotally, as Dutch Elm ever was in this particular area. In fact, if anything, I think it's worse. So the other comment I would just make, we talk about Bexhill tree planting, we should sure be talking about tree planting across Rother, and the other add-in that I would propose is that we actively look to help and support parish councils in any way where they have projects around tree planting, because I think that is something that right down, especially at that community level, is where you will get the buy-in for good quality projects around tree planting. And again, When you take it down to parish level, you can also engage with primary schools who will be keen to encompass the green agenda alongside tree planting, which frankly children find really, really interesting.
Got a number of hands there. Well, I'll take Councillor Polly Gray, who sent me an email with some questions, so I'll let you put those.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I did have a question for Ben, but while we're on the subject of trees, could I just say that I do agree entirely with what Councillor Maynard has said. Bexhill is full of, and so is Rother, of examples of the wrong tree in the wrong place. So that is something that we have considered very carefully, and that's part of the work that we've done with the Tree for Cities. I wanted to say, while we're on trees, that on page 110, paragraph 9, Ben, I wanted to say that where you say plus some additional tree planting on Bexhill Down is rather an understatement. I have actually planted about 1,000 trees on Bexhill Down. There's been a whole line going along the edge of Little Common Road. But we've also planted about 870 trees at the top end of the down, which has now been called King Offa Wood. These are all native trees, a lovely mix. They're underplanted with wildflowers, and every fortnight a small group of us go up and we regularly maintain the trees, we mulch them, we look after them, so they are extremely well looked after. I think that's all I wanted to say on trees. We are aware of ash dieback. There is a breed of ash that isn't susceptible to ash dieback. But I would say that of the trees that were lost in the storm, I did inspect quite a few of them that came down, and all of those trees, if you looked at them, were absolutely dead inside. So the trees that were vulnerable to falling were the trees that have already died from the inside. So they were, very vulnerable. The question I wanted to ask you, Ben, was about home insulation. I know that doesn't come up on our list, but I think that, we all know that fuel prices are going to rise astronomically. So this helps with fuel poverty, but it also, helps with the carbon footprint. So I just wondered if you could update us if the council has a strategy. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much. Yeah, home insulation is a very tricky one. We're not a stockholding authority, so we don't have direct ability to take direct action in the same regard. I know that the head of Service for Housing and Communities is working very closely with Optivo as our main registered provider and all of the other registered providers for that matter to try and access whatever grant funding is available to improve the fabric of their homes. And Optivo themselves are committed to that agenda, and it's just making sure that that's the case. I think in terms of private home ownership and insulating that, and then particularly the private rented sector, this is a national problem, and quite frankly, I think it needs a national solution rather than something that can be done at a local level because of the costs involved. You're talking hundreds of pounds per household at the very, very least. So it's it's something that needs to be addressed, I think, on a national level, and I think that's part of government's agenda as well.
I think if I go back to sort of touch on what you said there, Polly, on the rental properties, I think in 2025 or 26, the EPC rating on a rental property is going to be reduced, I think, from a minimum of a E or a D, which currently is, down to a C, which is going to be very awkward for a lot of landlords, especially of older properties. So there will be, significant costs there for people. And the thing is, even new houses now are being built just to a C classification, which, to be honest, they should all be A or B now, quite easily. I think something else that, as a council we could look at potentially is listed buildings in say, Rye, Winchelsea, Robertsbridge, where we have so many rules on listed buildings and what you can do to them to make them, well, I don't know if you can make them more efficient because you're not allowed to do anything. Apart from sort of secondary double glazing, which is quite often frowned upon, what can you do? When we have houses that have work done on them, and I speak to tradesmen in Rye, and they say, we've gone into a house and the listed buildings sort of people come along and say, oh, you can't replace that old plasterboard ceiling with a new plasterboard ceiling. You've got to do it in lard and plaster, which just seems completely bonkers. And then you're not allowed to put in sort of insulation materials. You can get double glazed windows, which are extremely thin, and you wouldn't even notice. But you can't do that. Even sort of draft proofing, sort of existing windows, they don't like that either. But it just seems sort of nonsensical, really, that you've got so many listed buildings in this area, and you're sort of hamstrung with what you can do to them. And I've worked in them before in the city of Rye, and in the winter, the people live in this house, which are worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they literally heat 2 rooms in the winter, and you just think, I don't know, the whole of my house is baking, and they're living in 2 rooms. It's not a thing of affordability, although it possibly could be. It's just totally impractical because they just leach heat, and it's that's an awkward thing where listed properties can be troublesome, and people fall over themselves to pay a lot of money to live in them. But I've got a number of councillors wishing to speak. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering, being not very knowledgeable about this sort of thing really, when we're talking about insulating, what materials are used to insulate? Because I was talking to somebody who's having their loft insulated with fiberglass, which I should have thought was extremely hazardous for the person that's actually laying it. It can't be very safe. And what do they insulate walls? Paul, you're a builder, so you probably can answer this. What materials are actually used to insulate properties? And how easy is it to dispose of it? How expensive is it? Or how difficult is it making it? How environmentally friendly is it, the stuff that's used?
Yeah, I think it's possibly getting a bit off grid, if you like. But most sort of, if you like, a roll of fiberglass insulation isn't actually that anymore. Mostly it's recycled plastics and recycled bottles. So it's not like 20 years ago when you used to in 2 seconds of opening the packet up. It's a lot better now.
Do you have to mask to wear it, to use it? Do you have to wear masks when you're installing it?
Of course.
I suspect it's hazardous.
But yeah, I've been using it for 30 years, so longer than that. So I'm still here at the moment. Yeah, and the other rigid insulation boards, everything else. There's all sorts. You can even do sheep's wool. That would be a good thing.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Following on from that, I was going to say, I don't know, and you're a builder, so I live next door to a builder and a friend who's a builder, and they both are very opposed to cavity wall insulation. They say that, in fact, that you shouldn't have it done because it causes damp rather than. Now, are you a builder? Would you agree with that?
In a coastal location, it's not the best idea because you're filling the cavity up. But so we wouldn't do it in Canberra, for instance, or we never used to. But most places it's fine. My cavity, I've got 150mm cavities fully filled at my house, so no trouble with me. So, yeah, well, it depends on different properties because they're built different, so they breathe differently. And if you fill the cavity up with the wrong stuff,
not quite as simple as,
no,
as it seems.
No, and expensive. Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wonder if on items on page 110, looking at items 10, 11 and 12, it's very Bexhill centric. I wonder if we could include in the next 6 monthly report a request for reports from parish councils to find out what they're doing to help with biodiversity, because it would make it a much more generic report if we could say, for example, that Battletown Council is preparing 2 wildflower meadows with swathes of walkways so people can enjoy them. And I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okey-dokey. Councillor Barnes, John Barnes.
Yes, I wanted to start actually by asking a little about the scope of this report, because when you turn to the appendix, we have corporate objectives, corporate projects, but they're to meet objectives. We have district ones and we have partnership ones. And it would be helpful, I think, to, if we're going to have a widespread update, if it were subdivided into those three aspects. Certainly I'm aware that the County Council has probably received one of the most major grants in the country, at £81 million towards buses, which will make a major difference in rural areas if they get the right projects delivering our climate strategy. But no mention of it here. I think somebody needs to think about the scope of the report. I'm glad we're beginning to press on, because it seemed to me that it was beginning to run into the sand. So, because I know there were changes of officer which made life difficult, but the group really pressing, I think, is very important given the ambitious target. No mention of the town hall or the insulation of buildings at all. Now, the town hall project is mentioned in the overview and scrutiny report, but not here. And yet that was part of the green strategy, I thought. And maybe our other buildings, the ones I have in mind where we have direct control, is obviously the rented buildings we're buying for the homeless. I trust we are going to insulate those if they're not properly insulated already. And I think that should be added to the project list. Trees. I agree with what Councillor Gray and Councillor Maynard have said. Very important, particularly in the high weald, to recognise just how other forms of landscape can absorb high amounts of carbon. It's not simply a question of tree cover. We've got very good tree cover in the high weald, but hedges can be a major absorber of carbon. And again, this is something we could be encouraging rather more than we are. I think on building standards, I'm not quite sure, and maybe I will be advised we haven't got the legal power to do this, but we set minimum standards of accommodation. We have now got powers of design. It would seem to me that we should be beginning to require the use of grey water, proper insulation, as part of our requirements for securing planning permission. And it's something which I think we should recommend that the planning committee look at. I live in a grade 2 listed building, so I must declare an interest. But even if you can't do anything on listed buildings themselves, what about within the curtilage of those buildings? Currently, we don't allow solar panels on the buildings. That's probably right, given their historic character. But many of those buildings are surrounded by outbuildings, and if they were allowed to actually use a solar panel within the curtilage, that could actually help greatly. So again, I think we do need to review the situation and recommend to the planning committee they review the situation of what is possible and what is not possible. And that would again be a major feature, I think, of my green strategy. My last question is simply one of fact. We were beginning to move to a baseline. How much progress have we made with that? Where are we? I'd rather expect to see it mentioned in this report, and it isn't. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll get Ben to respond. I think the building regs, national building regs, will cover the insulation of materials, and they're getting tighter and tighter all the time. So, and the fabric of the building. So, but Ben.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think sort of building on from that, for the most part, we are constrained in terms of what we can demand from developers of new build by the Part L regulations and under national building regs. That being said, we are looking, as part of the development of the new local plan, to sort of heighten any requirements that we do have powers to do so within the new local plan, and particularly around things like biodiversity, net gain, and which is again part of the national scene, but we have we have the ability to do more locally on that as well. So we are looking at that. In terms of the listed building thing, I've read recently that Kensington and Chelsea have decided that they're going to start allowing solar panels on their listed 4,000 listed buildings, should they want them throughout. So I've asked the planning policy team to look into that a little bit more and see what the potential is in terms of our local policies about. I mean, obviously we have the complexity of not only being listed building, but many of those listed buildings being in the Highwood AONB as well. So just looking, I mean, it's something that I've seen in the news. Therefore, I think it's worth some level of investigation as to how that's being done and whether there's any potential to move that over to us. In terms of the carbon baseline, you are right, it doesn't appear in this report. It will appear in the next 6 monthly report. You'll have a full one, but before that, you'll have the Q1 update for the KPI set, and so you'll have it ready for Q1 consideration because it's part of the KPI basket. So actually, this committee will have sight of that before the next environment strategy update anyway.
You want to come back, John?
I forgot one point which I really think is quite important. We, like most local authorities, we're talking a lot about electric power, and this is all going to put an enormous strain on the national grid. I think we do need to look, and it comes up very clearly under RTC deliverable. We're considering subsidising community bus service to go electric, but it may actually be more appropriate with heavy vehicles to go hydrogen. And similarly, with our waste collection contractor, in the longer term, I'm not against what you're experimenting with, but in the longer term, since we already have hydrogen buses in Brighton, it may well be that hydrogen power is more appropriate for lorries and refuse lorries than this current proposal. So I hope we keep our minds open to the fact that there is more than one green solution to some of these problems, and not worship at the shrine of the goddess Electra.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Remember to press the right button. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I agree with Councillor Maynard and Councillor Gray and probably most colleagues about trees. And trees are one of those things, especially where there's so much science and so much sort of knowledge already existing, that we can draw on to make sure we are as effective as we can be. And speaking of science, I have to say I found the carbon literacy training really helpful. And I don't think there's any reason why every member shouldn't become carbon literate as and when they're able to. I think it was really useful training. The report that came to the Environment Committee afterwards, one of the things that interested me most, and it might interest Councillor Carroll actually, is that Siddeley actually gets an A grade in its carbon output compared to places like Ticehurst and Etchingham, which gets an F. So actually, putting my anti-poverty hat on for a second, it does tend to be those areas where there are wealthier individuals and there's less socioeconomic hardship that is actually outputting the most carbon, and where we need to target the most in terms of getting people to change their habits and change the way they live and move, whereas areas like Siddeley seem to actually be producing far less carbon. So that's an interesting thing, talking about sort of evidence and science about how we focus. I'm really glad to see that Ben and Lorna and others have got a handle on that. I was going to say something else. With my young person's cabinet spokesperson hat slightly on, just to say that buy-in from schools and buy-in from young people's organisations is really important whenever we're doing things like this. The children are the future, as they say, but actually they're also probably the biggest source of enthusiasm for environmental projects and climate-related projects kids are coming home from school and telling their parents all about, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this. So that's a really good source of energy to use and to build on. Not a literal source of energy, obviously, but to use and build on in terms of trying to get community buy-in. So I think if we can keep focused on that, we're going in the right direction. But a really good report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to trees again, Councillor Maynard, it may be stating the obvious, but we all love to plant as many trees as we can in as many locations, and quite a few residents in my ward have suggested locations in my ward where we might plant trees. But what you've got to remember is the utility services, gas, water, and electric, and the street lighting. All those cables are some less than a metre underground, and you'd have to work with them to make sure you weren't going to cause any damage there, or it's a tree that's going to have very long, deep roots, and in the future might disturb any of that. So any residential areas where we want trees, you would have to work very closely with the utility companies to make sure you're not going to cause a problem. And I'll be obvious, but
Polly reckons she's got an answer to that.
Yes, I have been involved in planting some trees in roadside verges, and we do work very closely with James Newmarch at East Sussex County Council. He has a map of all the underground services, so he is very helpful and tells us exactly where we can plant the trees. So we do take that into account.
Good, thank you. Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Catherine Fields has been trying to talk for some time, in fact. I'm happy to give way to her for now if you want me to. Or shall I carry on?
I shall let Councillor Phil finish up.
I do apologise. Thank you. I was invited to a joint meeting of Bexhill Chamber of Commerce and Tourism and Bexhill Heritage last week. And what you were talking about, Chair, concerning the listed buildings and the conservation area was a hot topic there. And certainly the Chamber of Commerce are quite frustrated because they feel that there's quite a negative attitude, that's their perception, coming from the conservation officer and other planning officers concerning the replacement of windows. Now, they are looking for some sort of generic solution so that landlords can be encouraged to invest. The Bexhill Heritage seem happy to work closely with them and with Rother Council positively to look for solutions. And I understand Bexhill Heritage will be meeting the Conservation Officer this week to explore possibilities. And I've committed to writing a brief synopsis of the issues that came up last week's meeting to the Chair of Planning and to relevant officers. I think there's a focus on trying to move away from the difficulties with the conservation area towards finding solutions.
Thank you. Chief Executive would like a word.
I was just going to make the comment, Chairman, that the Council would be delighted to work positively with the Bexhill Chamber of Commerce and Bexhill Heritage and looks forward to that positive working.
Excellent.
Was that exactly the same as what you was going to say, Ben? Pretty much. Councillor Field, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting, Chair. I'm going to start off, if I may, with HVO, hydrotreated vegetable oil. I think I'm the only person here on the Joint Waste Committee, and I think we need to remember that actually we don't specify the vehicles ourselves because the contract is with BIFA. And I think BIFA actually would agree that hydrogen is the way forward, but currently there is no economical source of green hydrogen, and HVO is very much an interim measure. I've been assured, or we have been assured, that it's not coming from palm oil, it's coming from sustainable sources. An electric vehicle, an RCV, a refuse collection vehicle, was tried in Hastings and it worked really well, except, of course, there are range issues with electric vehicles, hence the move to HVO. Also, HVO will fit in a standard refuse collection vehicle. It doesn't need any modification, and if they're in the back of Beyond with their vehicles and they run out, they can top up with diesel. It's not like mixing petrol and diesel in your car. And it costs the same price as an ordinary RCV. Electric ones are 4 times the price. So it's very much an interim measure, is HVO, and we hope it's going to be a green interim measure. Because, of course, it takes a lot more storage for electric vehicles because they have to be topped up overnight and take a lot of space. You can't just park them on the roadside. So that was that. Somebody has said it's not just about trees, and it isn't. One of our massive resources in the county, which we know about, are the vergers. The County Council has been doing a project last year, whereas vergers in some small towns, Battle, and some villages weren't mown for any other reason apart from safety. And we had hoped the project would be rolled out next year or this year. We had an email saying they couldn't do that because this year we've just had has not been a typical growing season. Now, I have to say, as a gardener, I would like to know what precisely a typical growing season is. So I asked the question, and the answer was, it's all about rainfall. Last year was quite wet. If this year is as wet, we will know that wetness is the new normal. Well, I'm not a statistician either, and I don't think 2 years, actually, will constitute a statistical sample. And I do think the County Council just needs to roll out the wilding of vergers as soon as possible and accept that the temperature will vary and the rainfall will vary from year to year. Rant over. Yes, Parish Council is absolutely right. We have this pot of SIL money, which I'm hoping the parish councils will be able to apply for projects. For example, some parish councils up and down the country are making a lot of money for their village halls by having EVPs in their village hall car parks. This is purely my personal view. I am not at all precious about listed buildings. I think the climate emergency is far more important than a building looking pretty in a high street. And I think that PV panels, for example, are likely to be a temporary technology. You put them on, you take them off, you restore your roof. And I quite agree about I can't think of the word, double glazing. If it needs it to keep the heat in, reduce emissions, then so be it. And I think we just have to accept that. And remember that the buildings that we have listed, which look lovely, are all very ramshackle because over the years they've just adapted to what's going on. I'm sorry, that is my second rant of the evening. So, thank you for this report. Next time you have one, I hope you will see the baseline figures, a prioritised list of projects, a progress report on where they are, and a report on what we are spending our SIL money on and how it's being used to implement the strategy. And I would just point out that there's less strain on the grid with district heating systems rather than electricity coming straight off the grid. And there is a village not a million miles from Battle which is going down that road with its own village. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Field. Well, here we are. We've been updated. We've all had our words to say. So the recommendation is resolved that the progress made against the Environmental Strategy 2020 be noted. Are you happy with that?
I would like to see some of the suggestions that have been voiced in discussion drawn to the attention of the Cabinet, because I think
that be right, or should it come back to us? What would you think, Councillor Field? Would you prefer it to go, Councillor Barnes' sort of idea, go to Cabinet? Ben, you want to try?
Doesn't worry me at all as long as it happens and we go forward. Just as quickly as possible.
Proceed.
Well, I was going to suggest, if it's okay, is that actually we take the minutes of this meeting, capture all of those that have been put forward and put them to the Climate Change Steering Group as a as a first port of call to work up any recommendations that may need executive authority to go to Cabinet.
And there are several of the steering group here tonight, so we've all heard.
Yep, good. Happy with that? Okay, someone want to move? You want to move that, Councillor Cook?
Happy to move, Chair.
Councillor Gray, second. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. No one against? No, that's good. Calling in urgency procedures, item 7, pages 115 to 120. Malcolm's going to introduce this one, I think. Let's have a look. Yep. Purpose of the report: inform members of the use of calling emergency procedures during the period 1st of March 21 to 28th February 2022. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm sure this will get as much discussion as the environment strategy in terms of moving forward. Fairly straightforward report. It's a regular one that goes to you. Just a couple of points to highlight. There have been no executive decisions called in over the period, and there were 2 decisions of Cabinet within the approved budget and policy framework which were deemed to be urgent. They were, for your information, they're in paragraph 8, but they were in relation to the discretionary business restart grant scheme, which was to allow us to give immediate support to businesses, and also to the recommendations of the off-street car parks task and finish group, which was enabled to respond to East Sussex County Council within their timescale. As members will be aware, as paragraph 6 says, any 2 non-executive members, one of whom must have been present at the meeting, or the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee, or the chair of the Scrutiny Committee, as I should probably say, can request a matter be called forward. Just moving on to paragraph 12, I mean, it is officers' view that the procedure continues to operate well, so therefore we're not recommending any changes to the procedure. And so the recommendation is to note the report. If you did wish to amend it, it would require a recommendation to full council, because obviously we would be changing part of the constitution. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
The report to be noted, unless you've got anything to say on it. I would hopefully say it could be noted. So we want to move in a second, I would assume, on this. Is that right, June? Yep. Councillor Cook.
Happy to second Councillor Barnes's proposal to move it.
You've moved it. Councillor Barnes has moved and Councillor Cook has seconded, so that's good. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. No one against? No. Good. Excellent. Let's have a look. 121, item 8. This is the draft annual report to Council from well, I suppose me, or this committee. As usual, done by Louise, who's not here tonight, so I can't thank her personally. But we've been busy bees, as you can see. But we always are busy bees, so there we are. Anybody have any questions on this? Councillor Clark?
Just want to say, Chairman, how good and effective your chairmanship has been over the last 12 months, and we appreciate that. And anybody who wonders about the effectiveness of scrutiny, if you look at the range of issues that we looked at, all which are key policies of the council, it's there before you. Scrutiny does work, and it is effective. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Clark. But we're only as good as we all are, so we all put our time in, and that's what we do. I thank Councillor Cook for being deputy as well, and I thank you for your time over the last 12 months. So, thank you very much. So, if someone wants to move that, I better not do it myself, better I? Councillor Errington's happy to move. Seconder, Councillor Clark. Thank you very much. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Page 135. There it is. Agenda item 9, our work programme. So work programme for 22-23 starts on the 6th of, is that May? April? May? June. Time flies, doesn't it? Halfway through the year already. Performance report, then well, that's general stuff. I think what we'd better do is probably leave that is for now, and then after the full council, the annual council meeting, we see who's on the committee, and then we have a meeting, is that right? To work out the following year, the preceding year's work programme.
Yes, Chair, you've actually got the annual Scrutiny Work Programme meeting, which all non-executive members have been invited to attend. So that's on the 17th of May at 2 o'clock in the council chamber. The leader of the council has also been invited to come along to that as well. And that's when you'll get the opportunity to put forward ideas of what you want to put on the work programme for the next year.
Councillor Barnes.
Chairman, I notice we haven't managed to review either the tourism strategy or to look at the impact of Airbnb, which is quite troublesome. I have to say too, at today's meeting of ESALC, the whole question of people living in what are effectively caravans on sites and paying no council tax has been raised as, again, a quite important issue. The whole tourism scene is changing quite fast, and it's getting mixed up with the housing scene in ways which are quite difficult. I think this, therefore, is becoming quite urgent. I would hope we could probably schedule it quite soon rather than pass it over again.
Yep, Councillor Maynard.
Informs us about, is that a hybrid meeting or is it attendance only?
The intention is that it will be actually in the chamber.
Right, I didn't know whether there was going to be a facility for other members to be dialing, seeing as all non-executive members have been invited. Just wondered if that was going to be a hybrid meeting.
Totally, it's up to me.
Well, given what we've said about environmental benefits of hybrid meetings, it just seems to me to be an opportunity if people want to dial in also for part of the meeting that they're particularly exercised about a particular issue they want the Scrutiny Committee to look at, then they can dive in and dive out without having to travel X amount of miles to come to the meeting.
To be honest, Chairman, I think it's being held in here. We have the facility to do it in that way. It would seem to be a little bit sort of pointless not to at least offer it, as Councillor Maynard is.
My second comment comes from exactly what Councillor Barnes has alluded to. And again, I think across the political spectrum, I think we would all agree in terms of low-cost housing, in terms of that whole swathe of people that we don't talk about very much, which is those that live on caravan sites, who are essentially living on them permanently, with 2 weeks, most of them now, anecdotally, it's 2 weeks of the year where they're not where are the energy certificates for those? And I can tell you, quite frankly, I have people that obviously mention the very fact that in terms of living in those in the winter, sometimes for people can be extremely challenging, to say the least. And again, I think it's something that, as an authority and indeed central government, need to look at this very carefully. The other thing is, of course, that when you talk about specific roads being not congested, because they talk about, and again, I can think of a particular arterial road that runs along connects Hastings with Battle, whereby you've got a situation where you've got hundreds of new homes being developed, and yet there are 1,000 people living within just one caravan site, but that's not factored into any transport impact modelling. So that I just want us to be aware that in terms of what we do here, and it's probably far too broad an area, but if there's some area where the council obviously has an influence, it's certainly something we need to have, not just a weather eye out, but it's a serious area where I think people, frankly, have significant challenges in their day-to-day living, whereby we think of them, as Councillor Barnes alluded to, as tourists, where in fact, for pretty much most of those people would regard themselves as living in those properties as, I mean, they have to give an address, but I think most of us know that I'm not saying they're bogus addresses, but certainly those addresses for post aren't even where they go for that 2 weeks when they're not in those dwellings. So it's a significant issue, I think, for a lot of us who have these caravan sites within either immediately in our wards or adjacent to them.
Well, I think we was the 17th, Julie, the meeting. Yeah. So I think on the 17th, 2 o'clock. Is that right? 2 o'clock. Yeah. I think if most of us are here who are on that committee, it would probably be best if we were here in person. And the invitation to all our councillors, if they wish to come in person, then fine. And if they wish to go remotely, then fine as well. If they've only got 1 or 2 points to make, so that'd be good. So moving on from that, I think time to declare the meeting closed. So I say thank you for your attendance. Declare the meeting closed at 7:36. Thank you very much, everybody.